Today we want to look at Soldier Monument in Pine Grove Park, or technically Soldier and Sailor Monument. We looked at this in video number 9. But today we'd like to look at the story behind the monument. This, of course, was taken at its present location in the center of that grassy triangle. And this is looking down from the satellite view. It had to be moved from the old location because of the new water filtration plant going in. And it seems like a long ways in my mind, but according to the Times Herald, it was only 190 feet, which would place it right about where that yellow star is. It's set just kitty corner from the old waterworks. You can see where it is from that red arrow. And here you can see it from the ground level and its relationship with the old waterworks. This is Soldier's Monument at the original location. And to really understand and appreciate this monument, you have to know the story behind it. In 1892, the Civil War had been over for several decades, and still there was no memorial, no recognition for all the men that died in the Blue Water area. Everyone wanted one, but nobody had the money to put it up. And along came a man named Jacob F. Batchelor. He was born in New York in 1811. He left his home at the early age of 11 years old to make his fortune. At 18 years of age, he went to Canada and was back and forth several times between Canada and New York, until 1835 when he came to Port Huron. In 1852, he engaged in the lumbering business with John Howard. The partnership continued for about 4 years when Mr. Batchelor bought out Mr. Howard. Mr. Batchelor built a one-circular sawmill on St. Clair River. And looking down from this satellite view, I can tell you about where it was, because in his obituary it said it was nearly in the rear of where John Jenkins's house now stands, which was at 1820 Military Street, which is his home right here. And just in case you don't recognize it from the satellite view, I'm sure you'll recognize it from the street view, because this is one of my favorite homes in Port Huron, originally built for John Jenkinson. On an article about his life, it said that in 1869 he built another sawmill, a large sawmill, on the ground that was then occupied by Dunford and Albertson's lower dry dock. Well, when I saw that, I perked right up, because lower dry dock, that must mean that there was an upper dry dock. As far as I knew, Dunford and Albertson only had the one dry dock at the mouth of Black River, right next to the Howard lumber mill. They had several owners, but it was always the same dry dock. And here's a photograph of what turned out to be the upper dry dock. So where was the lower dry dock? Well, in checking the Sanford maps, I found this little insert. It doesn't give the address, but it does show that dry dock on Military Street. And those two dry docks was verified by the city directory from 1892, showing that Dunford and Albertson had one on Merchant Street, which would have been the one by Black River, and the one on the St. Clair River. And it says here, below the toll gate. That doesn't really give us any information exactly where it was, but it does tell us that there was a toll gate between Military Street and the Military Turnpike, or Military Road, which went to Detroit. In a later city directory, it gave the exact address, 2530 Military Street, which would have been right about this location here, looking down from the satellite map. So this would have been not too far south of the Wolverine dry dock. All right, I've digressed a little bit here, but it's always fun to learn something new. The Panic of 1873 was a financial crisis that triggered an economic depression in Europe and North America that lasted from 1873 to 1877. In the United States, the panic was known as the Great Depression until the events of 1929 and the early 1930s set a new standard. In In 1875, financial difficulties overtook Mr. Batchelor and his business, and he was cleaned out. In 1878, he went to Saginaw and with his son Henry, built a mill at Melbourne on the Saginaw River, just 8 miles below Saginaw. David Whiting of Detroit furnishing the capital, and the Batchelors furnishing the experience and the care. This proved to be a profitable venture, and the Batchelors steadily made money and saved it too, so that at the time of his death in January of 1892, he was a wealthy man. Only a year earlier, Mr. Batchelor erected in Lakeside Cemetery a beautiful and costly monument. This perhaps reminded him that he, being then almost 80 years of age, could not in the natural course of events remain upon this earth many years longer, and desiring to dispose of his wealth in a little different manner from what the law would dispose of it, he made his will. Mr. Batchelor didn't forget the folks in Port Huron. This article appeared in the Daily Times after Mr. Batchelor's death, and it told who was the beneficiaries of the will. Mr. Batchelor left $10,000 for the Soldiers' Monument in Port Huron, $3,000 to the hospital and home, and $2,000 to the Ladies' Library Association. $10,000 back then was over $250,000 today, so no small amount. The article goes on to say, the monument must be erected in the city of Port Huron. For years past, the soldiers have been looking forward to the time when they could erect a suitable monument in Lakeside Cemetery. But as the cemetery is in Fort Gratiot, the question of placing this monument in that place cannot be thought of. It is probable that it will be placed in some park. At any rate, the matter is in good hands. A fellow by the name of Alice Noble wrote the Daily Times. There are many reasons why the park is not a proper place for it. It is a well-known fact, although no worse than other large cities and villages perhaps, there are scores of young hoodlums in our city who delight in seeing how near they can throw a stone or a brick at something and not hit it. It is the opinion of the writer that it would require constant guard to prevent depredations being committed to the injury of the surroundings and the monument itself. Now please let me suggest a location which I think all or nearly all of our citizens will concur in, and which is my opinion is the best place that can be named. It is where the fountain is now located in front of the post office and custom house. Let our city fathers apply to the authorities at Washington, and no doubt they could get a permit to remove the fountain and perhaps replace it in the backyard, and let the ladies meditate in more silence and give the local authorities the privilege of erecting the Soldiers' Monument where none could miss it. Another citizen wrote, unless a smoke consumer is used at the waterworks, the statues on the Soldiers' Monument will soon look like colored soldiers. So guess where they placed the monument? Pine Grove Park. It goes on to say that the committee spent several hours looking over the design submitted and finally concluded to award the contract to Edward Laundrie. As stated in Saturday's Times, this monument is 15 feet 6 inches square at the base and 60 feet high. The design calls for a figure of the Goddess of Liberty on top of the monument. And you can see some of the monuments around the country kept that design. And it goes on to say, but a standard bearer will be substituted. It was also decided to have 2 statues on the sides of the die, one representing the Army and one the Navy. The 2 remaining sides will be ornamented with handsome bronze Grand Army badges. The monument is handsomely ornamented and made entirely of granite. And so the monument was created, and it arrived in Port Huron, October 23, 1893, about a year after the final approval was given for the monument. And it arrived on 8 train cars, as you can see from this little newspaper blurb. November 13, 1893, in the Daily Times. Soldiers' Monument. Grand Army men from all sections will be present on the occasion of its unveiling. Arrangements for the unveiling of the Soldiers' Monument next Thursday have been completed, and if the weather is fine, there will be a large number of visitors in the city. November 16th, the day of the unveiling, Veterans Day. Old soldiers help unveil the monument. Interesting exercises at the park this afternoon. What I found interesting about this article, it says the old soldiers attracted considerable attention as they marched through the streets to the strains of martial music. Several walked on crutches, and there were many empty sleeves. The parade started on Broad Street, which is now McMorran. And instead of turning north on Huron Avenue going to Pine Grove Park, they turned south, went across the bridge to Military Street, went down Military to Court, Court to 7th Street, 7th Street again across the bridge to Erie, and then Erie to Pine Grove Park. November 17th, the day after, monument unveiled in memoriam for the soldiers of St. Clair County, the noble gift of the late Jacob F. Batchelor. Impressive ceremonies on Thursday afternoon. Thousands of people turned out Thursday afternoon to witness the ceremonies attending the unveiling of the Soldiers' Monument in Pine Grove Park. Of course, I don't have a photograph of that ceremony, but this is probably one of the earliest photographs that was taken of Soldiers' Monument. And so it would look very much like that when they had the unveiling. This is basically a black and white, and on this postcard you can see the colorized version. There was a pavilion set up on the west side of the monument on the Pine Grove side, and the veterans were all allowed to gather near the pavilion and the monument so they would be closest to the speakers. Years went by. There was a tennis court that was built just south of the Soldiers' Monument. But eventually things changed in the park. The wading pool was filled in, the pavilion was torn down, and the bandstand that replaced it was also torn down. The smokestack was moved from the north side of the waterworks to the south side. Well, not really moved, the new one was built, and the train tracks were taken out of the park. And eventually a water filtration plant was being built in the Pine Grove Park, and therefore something had to be done with the monument. And so they decided to move it. No small task, I might add. Soldier Monument had been at that location for over 70 years. But in 1964 that would change. Davis & Sons House Moving Company was hired to move it from the old location to the present location. The caption on this photograph reads, "The Soldiers and Sailors Monument moves from its original base in the foreground 30 feet toward a new base which is 240 feet north. The monument rests on a steel platform which serves as a type of sled, which moves along the heavy timber runway. By means of a hydraulic jack and a winch, the monument was moved 30 feet Tuesday." Notice it says 240 feet. In a previous Times Herald article, it says 190 feet. So this is a longer route. Perhaps they took the scenic route. Here's another photograph supplied by Tim McIntyre that shows a little different view. And last but not least, here's a color photograph supplied by Roy Porter, T.J. Campney, Frank Frisch collection. Over the last 100 years or so, there have been many changes to this monument. Some of these cannons are now gone. All the cannonballs are gone. The fence that surrounded the monument is gone. The 4 golden eagles that were on the corner of the fence are gone. And last but not least, it's no longer at its original location. But don't focus on the things that are no longer there. Focus on the purpose of the monument, and that is to focus on all those that lost their lives in the Civil War. They were fathers, they were sons, they were brothers. More men lost their lives in the Civil War than all the other wars, even World War II. They lost their lives in places like Gettysburg, Chickamauga, Spotsylvania, Chancellorsville, Shiloh, Antietam, Vicksburg. places that the folks in Port Huron had never heard of even, until they got the message that their loved one was killed in action. And also remember the generosity of a man named Jacob F. Batchelor, for without him, we would not have this monument. There's a couple more things I'd like to look at in Pine Grove Park, so join me in my next video and we'll see if we can't cover them then.